I am the owner of the Daily African Nollywood. Please subscribe my channel for new interesting AI Nollywood movies.
The Lagos sun blazed mercilessly as Chisom stepped out of the air-conditioned shopping mall, her shopping bags hanging from both wrists like trophies of conquest. At 28 years old, she had everything a woman could want. A trust fund that could rival the GDP of small nations, a penthouse in Victoria Island, a fleet of luxury cars, and designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Yet, as she sat in the back seat of her Range Rover, being driven by her personal chauffeur Emeka through the bustling streets of Lagos, she felt an overwhelming emptiness that no amount of money could fill. Chisom had grown up in privilege, the only daughter of Chief Obinna Okoro, one of Nigeria's most successful oil magnates. Her mother, Lady Amara, was a renowned philanthropist and socialite who graced the covers of luxury magazines regularly. Growing up, Chisom had attended the best schools, travelled to every corner of the world, and was always surrounded by people who wanted to be her friend. Yet, as she matured, she realised something troubling. None of these friendships were genuine. Everyone wanted something from her. The girls who claimed to be her best friends were actually competing for her father's business connections. The boys who pursued her romantically were more interested in her bank balance than her heart. By 28, Chisom had been engaged 3 times. Each time she discovered that her fiancés were either cheating on her with women they found more interesting or were simply marrying her for access to her family's wealth. The last engagement had been particularly painful. Her fiancé, a charming banker named Tunde, had carried on a 2-year affair with her former best friend Zainab, all while planning their wedding. When Chisom found out, she didn't just call off the engagement, she made sure Tunde's infidelity became public knowledge in their social circles, something she wasn't particularly proud of now, but her wounded heart had demanded justice at the time. That incident had happened 6 months ago, and since then, Chisom had withdrawn from the social scene almost entirely. Her mother was concerned, her father was bemused, and her extended family was beginning to gossip, suggesting that perhaps Chisom was meant to be a spinster. The final straw came at her cousin Bukunmi's traditional wedding ceremony 2 weeks ago. Chisom's aunt, her father's sister, had pulled her aside in front of several guests and said, "My dear, at your age you should have a husband by now. People are beginning to wonder if there's something wrong with you. Perhaps you're too picky. Maybe you should lower your standards." The comment had stung, and worse, it had made Chisom realise that her family, despite their wealth and sophistication, still held the same traditional views that trapped so many women in unhappy marriages. That evening after the wedding, Chisom sat in her penthouse apartment, staring at the Lagos skyline, and made a decision. She would date someone. But not someone from her world. She would date someone completely different. Someone from the average, struggling Nigerian masses. And she would do it publicly, in front of her family and friends. She would show them that love transcended class, that a man's worth wasn't measured by his bank balance, and that she was perfectly capable of being happy with someone ordinary. Of course, there was one small problem with this plan. She couldn't actually fall in love with just anyone. So instead, she would hire someone. She would pay a man to pretend to be her boyfriend, to accompany her to social events, to hold her hand, to look at her adoringly in photographs that would be posted on Instagram. It was audacious, perhaps even a bit mad, but Chisom was desperate enough to try it. The question was, how does one hire a fake boyfriend in Lagos? Chisom couldn't exactly place an advertisement on LinkedIn. She needed someone who was good-looking enough to be presentable at high society events, but not so ambitious that he might think he could actually seduce his way into her family's wealth. She needed someone who was struggling enough to accept a generous payment, but not so desperate that he would cause complications. The perfect candidate would be someone young, charming, intelligent, and above all, someone who understood the transactional nature of the arrangement and could maintain appropriate boundaries. Chisom spent the next week discreetly making inquiries. She couldn't ask her friends, obviously, But she did speak to her personal assistant, Kemi, who had worked for her for 5 years and was one of the few people in her employ who seemed to actually care about her as a person, rather than just as a paycheck. Kemi's eyes had widened when Chisom first broached the subject during their usual Friday afternoon tea in the Penthouse. "Ma, are you serious right now?" Kemi had asked, nearly spilling her tea. "You want to hire a man to pretend to be your boyfriend?" "I'm completely serious," Chisom had replied calmly, stirring her tea. "It's only for 6 months, just until my family and friends get used to the idea that I can be with someone outside our usual circles. Then we'll have a dignified breakup, and I'll move on with my life. It's really not as complicated as it sounds." "But Ma, what if this man falls in love with you?" Kemi asked. "What if things get complicated? These things never end well in the movies."
"Then I'll deal with it," Chisom said, with more confidence than she actually felt. "Besides, I'm not asking you to do this, Kemi. I'm asking if you know anyone who might be interested in such an arrangement. Someone you trust, someone reliable." Kemi had been skeptical, but had promised to think about it. 2 days later, she approached Chisom with a suggestion. Her cousin, Adeniyi, was a struggling actor and model who was currently between jobs. He was handsome, intelligent, and most importantly, he was trustworthy. He had just lost his modeling contract and was desperately looking for any opportunity to make money while he pursued his acting career. He wouldn't ask questions, Kemi assured her, and he was the type of person who understood the need for discretion. Chisom had arranged to meet Adeniyi at a small cafe in Lekki, away from the prying eyes of her usual social circles. She had chosen the time carefully, a quiet Wednesday afternoon when the cafe would be nearly empty. When Adeniyi arrived, Chisom's first impression was that he was even more handsome than she expected. He was tall, with smooth dark skin, sharp cheekbones, and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to assess everything they looked at. He wore simple but well-fitted clothes, a white linen shirt and dark jeans, and he carried himself with the kind of natural grace that suggested he was indeed a model. "Kemi said you wanted to meet me," Adeniyi said, as he sat down across from her, his voice warm and slightly curious. She was a bit mysterious about what this was about, so I have to admit, I'm intrigued. Chisom took a sip of her coffee, gathering her thoughts. She had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, but now that the moment was here, she felt slightly embarrassed. However, she pushed through the discomfort. "I have a proposal for you," she began, speaking clearly and directly. "I need someone to be my boyfriend for 6 months. Not a real boyfriend, obviously. This would be a professional arrangement. You would accompany me to social events, dinners, charity functions, that sort of thing. You would need to be charming, attentive, and convincing. In public, you would hold my hand, perhaps put your arm around me, look at me like you care about me. You would need to be prepared to answer questions about how we met and how long we've been together. I will provide you with background information to keep your story consistent." Adeniyi's expression didn't change. He didn't look shocked or offended. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because I'm tired of people judging me based on my family's wealth," Chisom said, deciding to be honest. "I'm tired of people assuming that I'm too picky or that something is wrong with me because I haven't found a husband yet. I want to be with someone different, someone from outside my usual circles, and I want to do it publicly, so that people understand that love isn't always about money or social status." "But you don't actually want to be with me," Adeniyi said, and it wasn't a question. "No, I don't," Chisom admitted. "This is a business arrangement. You would be very well compensated. I'm offering you 500,000 naira per month for 6 months, plus an additional 2 million naira bonus at the end if you fulfill all the terms of our agreement. You would also have access to my car and driver when you need them for the purposes of our arrangement. In addition, I would help you with your modeling and acting pursuits if the opportunity arose. Adeniyi whistled low. That's a lot of money, he said. Is it enough? Chisom asked. Adeniyi was quiet for a long moment. Chisom could see the internal struggle on his face. He was clearly tempted by the money, but he also seemed to be wrestling with the ethics of the arrangement. What happens after 6 months? He asked finally. How does this end? Gracefully, Chisom said. We tell everyone that we've decided we want different things, that we've realized the relationship isn't working. We remain friendly but go our separate ways. If anyone asks, we can say that the distance between our worlds was just too great, or that we wanted different things for our futures. It's a very common reason for breakups. And what if people get attached to me? Adeniyi asked. What if your family or your friends start to care about me? What if they feel betrayed when they find out it was all fake? That's a risk I'm willing to take, Chisom said. And frankly, it's a risk you would be taking as well. But I believe it's a manageable risk, particularly if we're careful and discreet about how we handle the arrangement. Adeniyi was silent for another long moment, his fingers tapping against the cafe table in a rhythmic pattern that suggested he was thinking carefully about his decision. Chisom had learned long ago that in negotiations, patience was often the key to getting what you wanted. She didn't press him or try to convince him further. She simply waited. I have 2 conditions, Adeniyi said finally. First, if at any point either of us feels that the arrangement is no longer working, or if either of us feels uncomfortable, we can terminate it immediately with 1 week's notice. No questions asked, and I would still receive payment for that week. Second, I need you to be honest with me about any expectations you have. If you're going to introduce me to your family, I need to know beforehand what kind of story we're telling and what kind of behavior you expect from me. I don't want any surprises. Chisom felt a surge of relief. Those are very reasonable conditions, she said. I accept both of them. When can you start? When do you need me to start? Adeniyi asked. There's a charity gala next Friday at the Civic Centre, Chisom said. It's a major event, and many of my family members will be there. I think it would be the perfect opportunity to introduce you as my new boyfriend. Would that timeline work for you? It would, Adeniyi said. But I'll need clothes. I assume you'll want me dressed appropriately for these events? Of course, Chisom said, pulling out her phone. I'll arrange for a stylist to meet with you. I'll also have my assistant provide you with all the necessary information. My family history, my background, details about my life that you should know so that you can answer questions convincingly. We'll need to have another meeting before Friday to go over the story we're telling about how we met. This feels very calculated, Adeniyi observed with a slight smile. Very well organized. Very unlike actual relationships. Exactly, Chisom said, returning his smile. Which is probably why it will work. We're not going to get confused about what this is. There's no ambiguity. It's a business arrangement, and we're both adults who understand and accept the terms. What Chisom didn't realize as she shook Adeniyi's hand to seal their agreement was that she had just set in motion a series of events that would completely upend her carefully constructed life. She didn't know that Adeniyi had his own secrets, his own wounds, and his own reasons for accepting an arrangement that most people would find utterly ridiculous. She didn't know that within weeks, their fake relationship would start to feel surprisingly real, or that she would find herself catching feelings for a man she had hired to simply play a role.
But that was all still to come. For now, Chisom left the cafe feeling lighter than she had in months. She had a plan, and she had found the perfect person to execute it with. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, quite a lot. The charity gala at the Civic Centre was one of Lagos's most prestigious annual events. Held every year to raise funds for various charitable causes, it attracted Lagos's wealthiest and most influential families. The women arrived in elaborate gowns that had been custom-made by designers from around the world, and the men wore tailored tuxedos that spoke of old money and established power. It was the kind of event where deals were made, alliances were formed, and reputations were either made or destroyed, depending on who you were seen with and how you carried yourself. Chisom had attended this gala every year of her adult life. She knew the expected protocols, the unspoken rules of the event, and exactly how the evening would unfold. What was different this year was that she was arriving with a Denii on her arm.
The preparation had been thorough. Chisom had spent the better part of the week with Kemi, preparing a detailed briefing for Adenii about her family and their background. They had created a story about how they met at an art exhibition at a gallery in Ikoyi, where Adenii was supposed to be working as a gallery assistant, and they had gone over the kinds of questions Chisom's family members were likely to ask. Chisom had explained her family's personalities and dynamics, warned Adenii about which family members were gossipers and which ones were more straightforward, and given him a crash course in the kinds of conversations that typically happened at these events. The stylist had worked wonders with Adenii's appearance. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that seemed to have been made specifically for his frame, a white dress shirt that made his skin glow, and a simple black tie that added to his overall air of sophistication. His hair had been styled with precision, and he looked every inch like someone who belonged in Chisom's world. When he arrived at her penthouse to pick her up that Friday evening, Chisom felt a small flutter in her chest that she quickly attributed to nervousness about the evening ahead. She was wearing a stunning white gown made of the finest Italian silk, with intricate beading that caught the light as she moved. Her hair had been styled in an elaborate updo by her personal hairdresser, and her makeup was flawless. She looked every inch the wealthy heiress she was, and as she took Adenii's arm, she felt a sense of anticipation about what the evening would bring. "You look absolutely beautiful," Adenii said as they descended in the elevator to the lobby. His tone was professional, the kind of compliment one would give an acquaintance, but his eyes held something that looked almost like genuine appreciation. Chisom reminded herself that he was an actor, and a good one at that, so of course he would be convincing. "Thank you," she said. "You look very handsome as well. Are you nervous?" "A little," Adenii admitted. "I've never been to anything like this before. I'm counting on you to guide me through the evening and give me subtle cues if I'm making any mistakes." "You'll be fine," Chisom assured him. "Just follow my lead, stay close to me, and remember the story we discussed. If anyone asks you questions, take your time before answering and try to keep your responses focused on me. People love talking about their connections with wealthy people, so you'll be playing the role of someone who is deeply impressed and somewhat awed by my family's world. That's a role that should come naturally to most people." They arrived at the Civic Center to find the parking lot already filled with luxury vehicles. Valets in uniform rushed to help guests from their cars, and the red carpet at the entrance was lined with photographers eager to capture images of Lagos's elite. Chisom had made sure to inform the event organizers that she would be bringing a guest, so there was no surprise when she and Adenii walked the red carpet together. The photographers called out her name, and she responded with the practiced smile and wave of someone accustomed to being photographed. "Chisom, who is your handsome companion?" one photographer called out. "This is Adenii," Chisom said, tightening her grip on his arm slightly. He's very special to me. Adeniyi smiled at the photographers, and even through the flashes and chaos of the moment, Chisom could see that he was handling the attention gracefully. He posed with her for several pictures, maintaining an expression of affection that was subtle enough to be believable, but obvious enough that anyone looking at the photos would understand that they were together. Once inside the venue, they were greeted by the event's organizers, who made a fuss over Chisom as they always did. Chisom introduced Adeniyi as her boyfriend, and she watched with interest as he handled the social interactions with ease. He was charming without being overly friendly, confident without being arrogant, and he seemed genuinely interested in the people he met. For a moment, Chisom found herself wondering if she had been right to assume that this arrangement could remain purely professional and transactional. Adeniyi had a quality about him that made him likable, and she could already see that people were responding positively to him. The evening progressed as Chisom had anticipated. They moved through the room, greeting friends and family members, accepting congratulations on their relationship, and engaging in the kinds of small talk that characterized high society events. Her parents, who had been informed in advance that she would be bringing a boyfriend, seemed pleasantly surprised by Adeniyi's charm and apparent sincerity. Her father, Chief Obinna Okoro, shook Adeniyi's hand firmly and seemed satisfied with his daughter's choice. Her mother, Lady Amara, was more openly enthusiastic, already mentally planning bridal showers and wedding ceremonies. It was her cousin Bukunmi, the one whose wedding had prompted this entire scheme, who first raised a concern. She pulled Chisom aside to the ladies' powder room, while Adeniyi was occupied in conversation with her father. "Okay, so where did you meet this guy?" Bukunmi asked, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "I have to say, you kept this secret very well. Last I knew, you were swearing off men forever." "I met him at an art gallery," Chisom said, sticking to the story she and Adeniyi had created. "About 2 months ago. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure about him." "Well, he seems nice," Bukunmi said, examining her reflection in the mirror as she touched up her lipstick. "But if you don't mind me saying, he seems a bit, I don't know, too perfect? He's almost too charming. Are you sure he's real?" Chisom felt her heart rate increase slightly at the question, but she kept her expression neutral. "What do you mean by that?" "I don't know. There's just something about him that feels a bit like he's performing," Bukunmi said thoughtfully. "Like he's playing a role. But maybe I'm just being paranoid. You know how I get about relationships. I'm always suspicious that men are being fake. Anyway, I'm happy for you. You deserve to be happy." After Bukunmi left the powder room, Chisom stood alone for a moment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Was Bukunmi right? Was Adeniyi's performance too good, too polished? Or was she simply overthinking things? She shook her head, reminding herself that this was exactly the kind of relationship drama she didn't need. Adeniyi was a professional, she was paying him well, and he was doing exactly what she had hired him to do. End of story. The evening continued, and as it progressed, Chisom found herself watching Adeniyi more than she was engaging with her own friends and family. She noticed the way he listened to people when they spoke, the way he asked follow-up questions that made people feel like he genuinely cared about their answers, and the way he seemed to genuinely enjoy the conversations he was having. She noticed, too, that several of her female friends' eyes lingered on him a bit longer than was strictly appropriate, and she felt an unexpected twinge of something that felt almost like jealousy. She quickly pushed the feeling away, attributing it to the natural desire to maintain the appearance of a woman who was deeply invested in her boyfriend. It was part of the role, after all. When it came time for the formal dinner, Chisom and Adeniyi were seated at a table with her parents, several family friends, and a couple of business associates of her father. The conversation around the table was the typical mix of business talk, gossip about mutual acquaintances, and discussions of recent philanthropic initiatives. Adeniyi navigated these conversations with impressive skill, asking intelligent questions about matters he clearly had no previous knowledge of, and seeming genuinely interested in the answers he received. At one point, her father asked Adeniyi directly what he did for a living. Chisom had prepared him for this question extensively, and he answered smoothly. "I'm a model and aspiring actor," Adeniyi said. "I've been fortunate enough to work with some major brands in Lagos, and I'm currently pursuing acting roles. The industry is competitive, but I'm passionate about it, and I'm committed to developing my craft." "Acting," her father said thoughtfully. "That's a challenging field, not the most stable career, I would imagine." "It's not," Adeniyi admitted with admirable honesty. "But nothing worth doing is ever stable. I'm willing to take the risk because it's something I'm passionate about." Her father nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. Later, after dinner, as Chisom and Adeniyi danced together on the dance floor, a moment that had been captured by multiple photographers, Chisom felt his hand firm against the small of her back, and she found herself actually enjoying the moment. It would have been easy to dismiss it as part of the performance they had agreed to, but there was something about being in his arms that felt surprisingly genuine. "Your family seems nice," Adeniyi said as they swayed to the music. "Your father is intimidating, but in a way that suggests he actually cares about the people close to him. Your mother is charming, and your cousin seems to genuinely care about you." "How can you tell all that after just a few hours?" Chisom asked. "I'm trained to observe people," Adeniyi said with a slight smile. "It's part of being an actor. You learn to read people's body language, their expressions, the way they interact with others. Your father looks at you with pride, but also with a hint of concern, like he's worried about you in a way he doesn't articulate. Your mother looks at you like you're her greatest achievement and her favorite project. And your cousin looks at you like she wishes she could protect you from something, but isn't quite sure what." Chisom pulled back slightly to look at his face. "That's very insightful, and somewhat unnerving if I'm being honest." "Is it?" Adeniyi asked. "Why unnerving?" "Because," Chisom said slowly, "it suggests that you're very good at seeing things about people that they might not want seen. It makes me wonder what you see when you look at me." For a moment, Adeniyi's professional mask seemed to slip. His eyes held something raw and vulnerable, and his expression seemed to reflect a genuine question about how to answer her. Then, almost as if he caught himself, the mask slipped back into place, and he smiled in a way that was charming but carefully controlled. "I see someone who is strong and capable," he said, his tone returning to its professional pitch, "but who has been hurt by people who didn't appreciate what they had. I see someone who is testing the world to see if genuine connection is possible. And I see someone who is trying to control outcomes because she's afraid of being vulnerable." "That's very perceptive," Chisom said quietly, "and somewhat accurate. But I'm paying you to be my boyfriend, not my therapist." "I know," Adeniyi said, "but good actors do more than recite their lines. Good actors understand their characters' motivations and psychology. It helps make the performance more authentic." The evening wound down around midnight, and Adeniyi drove Chisom back to her penthouse in her Range Rover, with Kemi's help in arranging the logistics. As they rode in comfortable silence through the Lagos night, Chisom found herself wondering about the man beside her. Who was Adeniyi really?
Why had he accepted this arrangement so readily? What was his story? She decided not to ask, at least not that night. Instead, she thanked him for doing a good job, confirmed that they would be attending another event the following week, and watched as he left the building. Over the next few weeks, Chisom and Adeniyi fell into a routine. They attended social events together, charity galas, dinner parties hosted by her parents, art exhibitions, and cocktail parties. To anyone observing them, they appeared to be a genuinely connected couple. Chisom's social circle began to accept Adeniyi as her permanent boyfriend, and invitations started to include both their names. Her mother had already begun dropping hints about the possibility of an engagement.
During this time, Chisom found herself spending increasing amounts of time with Adeniyi outside of the scheduled events. They would meet for lunch to go over upcoming events and the people who would be attending, but they would end up staying for hours, talking about everything from art to politics to philosophy. Adeniyi had a sharp mind and a wry sense of humor that Chisom found deeply appealing. He could make her laugh in a genuine way, not the polite social laughs she usually offered at parties, but real, from the belly laughter that left her feeling alive. She found herself looking forward to their meetings, and she had to constantly remind herself that this was a professional arrangement, that Adeniyi was being paid to be charming and attentive, and that any feelings she might be developing were misplaced and potentially dangerous. One evening, about a month into their arrangement, Chisom and Adeniyi attended a charity dinner at one of Lagos's most exclusive hotels. The event was raising funds for an orphanage, and it was the kind of event where Chisom's mother was not only a guest, but also one of the organizers. The evening proceeded as planned until about halfway through the dinner, Chisom's ex-fiancé, Tunde, arrived at the event with his new girlfriend, Zainab, the woman he had been unfaithful with. Chisom's immediate reaction was a spike of anger and embarrassment. She had not expected to see Tunde that evening, and she certainly had not expected him to have the audacity to bring Zainab to an event where he knew Chisom would be present. She felt her hands clench under the table, and she was trying to decide whether to excuse herself from the table or simply ignore them when Adeniyi, who had sensed the sudden tension in her body, gently placed his hand over hers. "Breathe," he whispered, barely loud enough for her to hear. "Whatever is happening right now, you're not alone. I'm here." Something about his words and the genuine concern in his eyes gave Chisom the strength to unclench her fists and take a deep breath. Instead of excusing herself or avoiding Tunde's gaze, she straightened her shoulders, turned toward where Tunde was being seated, made eye contact with him, and smiled. Not a fake society smile, but a genuine smile that conveyed that his presence had absolutely no power to upset her. She saw Tunde's expression shift from confident to uncertain in the space of a second, and she felt a small surge of satisfaction. She squeezed Adeniyi's hand briefly in gratitude, then turned her attention back to the people at her table, effectively dismissing Tunde and his new girlfriend from her consideration. Later that evening, as Chisom and Adeniyi left the hotel, she stopped him in the parking garage. "Thank you for that," she said, back at the dinner. "Thank you for knowing exactly what I needed in that moment." "You don't have to thank me," Adeniyi said. "Besides, I was just doing my job. Isn't that what you're paying me for? To make you feel better when you're with me?" "Is that really all you think this is?" Chisom asked quietly. "A job?" The question hung in the air between them. and Chisom could see the internal conflict in Adeniyi's face. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to be honest with her, like he was going to drop the professional mask completely and tell her something real. But then he stepped back, and his expression became carefully neutral. "What else would it be?" he asked in return. "We had an agreement, Chisom. I'm honoring it." "Right," Chisom said, feeling a wave of disappointment wash over her. "The agreement. I just thought maybe..." She trailed off, not sure what she had thought. "Maybe what?" Adeniyi asked. And there was an edge to his voice now, like he was fighting against something he didn't want to feel. "Never mind," Chisom said, shaking her head. "Let's just go home." The drive back to our penthouse was quiet and uncomfortable, filled with the kind of silence that speaks volumes. When Adeniyi dropped her off, he did so with his professional courtesy intact, but something had shifted between them. For the first time since they had begun their arrangement, Chisom felt the weight of the transactional nature of their relationship, and it made her deeply sad. What she didn't know was that Adeniyi was struggling with something equally difficult. In the weeks since he had agreed to be her fake boyfriend, his feelings for Chisom had evolved far beyond what was professional or appropriate. He had initially accepted the arrangement because he desperately needed the money. His dreams of becoming an actor and model were stalling, and his family was depending on him to contribute to household expenses. But as he spent more time with Chisom, as he learned about her hopes and fears, as he watched her navigate her complex family dynamics with grace and intelligence, he had found himself genuinely caring for her in a way that had nothing to do with the money she was paying him. It terrified him. He knew that their arrangement had an expiration date, that Chisom had made it clear this was temporary. He also knew that even if their arrangement continued, it would always be tainted by the fact that it had started as a transaction. How could he ever hope that Chisom would trust his feelings for her when she knew that he had originally accepted money to pretend? To be continued in chapter 2.